wins, what will happen to Ukraine? Source, Adrian Karatnycky, What a Russian Victory Would Mean for Ukraine, Foreign Policy, December 19, 2023. Adrian Karatnycky is a senior researcher at the General Assembly Tay Duong, founder of Myrmidon Group, and author of Battleground Ukraine, From Independence to the War with Russia, to be published by Yale University Press in June 2024. Ukrainians will face terrorism on a scale not seen in Europe since the totalitarian era of the 20th century. While Ukraine's counteroffensive has stalled and the U.S. Congress is still debating the important military aid, some analysts have begun to worry about a turning point in the war that could lead to Ukraine's defeat. Although the situation on the battlefield is not yet serious, it could quickly deteriorate without the significant military aid that the United States provides to Ukraine. The consequences of Ukraine's failure need to be fully understood. First, the geopolitical consequences are easy to predict. The defeat of a Western-backed state would encourage Russia and other revisionist states to change borders by force. A Russian victory would make its European neighbors fearful, likely leading to the collapse of collective European security as some countries choose appeasement, while others opt out. Massive rearmament. China will also conclude that Taiwan cannot count on long-term support from the United States. Indeed, the spillover effects of America's indecision are already appearing, in a move reminiscent of Russia's illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine. Venezuela this month declared its sovereignty for more than half of neighboring Guyana's territory. While there are no signs that an invasion is imminent, it would be naive to think that other countries aren't watching closely to see whether Russia succeeds in seizing land. Many analysts have described the above extensive security risks. But they are nothing compared to the dire consequences for Ukraine and its people if Russia wins. It is important that both those who support and those who oppose aid to Ukraine know what these consequences are. To understand what Ukraine's fate will be if Russia reverses the situation, the best starting point is Russia's statements. On December 8, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that, in his opinion, the Ukrainian state has no future. Previously, on December 5, he proposed his intention to re-educate the Ukrainian people, cure them of Russophobia and distortion of history. On November 12, former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev made Russia's wishes clear: Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kiev, and practically everywhere else are not Ukraine. He posted on Telegram that it is clear that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is a usurper, that the Ukrainian language is just a hybrid dialect of Russian, and that Ukraine is not a country, but region's artificially assembled territory. Other regime propagandists assert that the Ukrainian state is a disease that needs to be cured, and Ukrainians are a society that needs to be dewormed. More specifically, over the past 2 years, Russia's heavily censored state television has continuously propagated the rape of Ukrainians, the drowning of Ukrainian children, the razing of cities, and the destruction of elites. Ukraine, and physically tortured millions of Ukrainians. To summarize these developments, Russian Media Monitor has compiled a collection of representative short clips from Russian television, available with English subtitles. This coordinated campaign is not an empty threat, but a harbinger of what awaits the Ukrainian people. Through these images, we can realize what atrocities await Ukrainians if their country is completely or almost completely occupied by Russia. We can also predict the impact of Russia's victory on the atrocities that are already widespread in Russian-occupied territories. According to official Ukrainian sources, nearly 2 million Ukrainians in the occupied areas were forced to leave their homes and communities, to resettle in Russia, either temporarily or permanently. Other estimates range from 1.6 million to 4.7 million people. Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights Mariel Vovabilova said more than 700,000 Ukrainian children have been brought from Ukraine to Russia since February 2022, nearly 20,000 of these have been identified by Ukrainian authorities. Not only is removing children from their homeland and denying them access to their language and culture an internationally recognized war crime, but this forced assimilation is also covered by the United Nations Convention on Genocide is defined as an act of genocide. That is why the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Lvova. Russia not only exterminated Ukrainians in occupied areas, but also replaced them with Russian settlers, a continuation tragic of the systematic deportations, colonization, and Russification that took place during the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. In the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, where a Russian attack killed tens of thousands of civilians and destroyed 50% of the city's housing, several new apartment buildings have been recently built. Some of those buildings are for sale and Russian profiteers are quick to snap up the real estate at bargain prices. Ukraine's partially occupied south offers a clearer picture of the techniques used by the occupying forces to assert power. A Human Rights Watch report from July 2022 described torture, disappearances and arbitrary detentions in the region. During interrogation, civilians were subjected to various types of torture, including beatings, electric shocks, and sensory deprivation. Some prisoners have died from torture, and a large number have gone missing. The list of victims includes local officials, teachers, representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, non-governmental activists, and members of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Force. There is also a large amount of information collected by human rights monitors and journalists about the operations of the purification camps and concentration camps. Political indoctrination and militarization of youth became major features of life under Russian occupation. Political banners and posters promoting Russian patriotism were present everywhere in the occupied areas. New children's textbooks completely erase Ukrainian history, and preach hatred of Ukraine's leadership. The Ukrainian language is being eliminated from much of the education system, and relegated to the status of an archaic dialect, representing nothing more than a regional culture that is gradually disappearing and will soon crushed by mainstream Russian culture. Currently, the lives of millions of Ukrainians have been ruined in one way or another by Russia's terrible occupation. If Russia completes its conquest, that number will multiply. After nearly a decade of confrontation against Russia, Ukrainians have become highly united and mobilized to defend their country's borders, democracy, culture, and language, and even many Russian-speaking Ukrainians have switched to Ukrainian out of hatred for Moscow's invasion. Millions of Ukrainians were angered and radicalized by war crimes and the destruction of their towns and homes by Russian troops. Millions of Ukrainians volunteered to support the war effort, millions contributed funds to support the military, and an even larger number turned to social media to vent their anger and express themselves publicly. Their anger towards Putin and the Russian state. That only made the invasion more brutal and bloody. Because if Ukraine loses, almost the entire Ukrainian society will have to be punished, suppressed, silenced, or re-educated if the ultimate goal of the occupation is to quell resistance and annex the country. Russia. For this reason, a Russian takeover would be accompanied by arrests, long-term detentions, mass forced migration to the Russian heartland, large-scale cleansing camps, and political terrorism. If an uprising emerges, the level of repression will only deepen. Russia will also undertake a large-scale effort to eliminate material that promotes subversion, meaning all films, novels, poetry, essays, art, scholarly works, and the music contains references supporting Ukraine's independence period. Libraries and schools will no longer be able to contain such subversive content, essentially the bulk of the literary and cultural works that Ukraine has created over the past 3 decades. Writers and scholars will face 2 choices, either abandon their previous identities and work, or become non-humans in the new order. Many will face arrest or a worse sentence, simply because they help promote Ukrainian culture and hinder the process of Russification. Again, this is not speculation, but common practice in other territories Russia has occupied. Russia's territorial advances will be accompanied by a second wave of Ukrainian refugees, on a much larger scale than in early 2022, when some 7 million Ukrainians crossed the border into the European Union. For those Ukrainians who remained in their homeland, their future lay under totalitarian control of culture, education, and speech, accompanied by mass terrorism on a scale never before seen in the world. Europe since the totalitarian era of the 20th century. And that was the fundamental impact of Russia's victory. Members of the US Congress are free to vote against supporting Ukraine if they think, wrongly, that the outcome of the war does not affect America's national interests. However, they should not be allowed to oppose support for Ukraine without fully realizing it, brooding about the tyranny they would help empower, and their responsibility for the horrifying, entirely predictable crimes that would follow. Adrian Karatnycky is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, founder of the Myrmidon Group, and author of Battleground Ukraine, From Independence to the War with Russia, to be published by Yale University Press, issued in June 2024.